You're with Clement Manyathela.
702.
So we start the conversation now with Helen Zille, who is the DA Federal Executive Chair, and we'll talk about everything, basically, right? The realignment of South African politics. I want us to also find out how this GNU/coalition has been doing so far. There seems to be some stability, at least. You know, I'm always happy seeing, and I was saying this to a colleague of mine, that it's so good to see these ministers also just working and getting along. Whether they don't get along behind closed doors or not is a separate story, but it's good to see that they're just there to do their jobs. And it's good to see that all of them, or at least most of them, are trying to also be seen to be doing the work. That works for you and I. I would like them to actually compete, because at the end of the day, you and I are the ones at the receiving end of the good work that they want to be seen to be doing. So it works for you and I. It works for our democracy. So if you've got some inputs during this conversation, or you've got some questions, your own questions for Helen, you can give us a call on 011-883-0702. The WhatsApp line is 072-702-1702. Helen Zille, thank you so much for making time for us. Good morning.
Good morning, Clement, and it's good to be with you and your listeners. Dumelang.
Dumela Luena. So I want us to start off with how we characterize this arrangement that is currently at the union buildings, this government of national unity. There are people, there's a debate that started, in fact, after you were speaking over I think the last couple of days, sometime last week, and you said, well, actually it is a coalition if you look at it, but Cyril Ramaphosa wanted it to be a government of national unity because he needed a way to also sell it to the ANC, so to speak. How do you understand it, and why do you characterize it the way that you do?
Well, I say, like Will Shakespeare taught us, a rose by any other name will smell as sweet. It makes no difference what you call something, frankly. But a GNU anywhere is a coalition. A GNU anywhere where there's no party with 50% plus is a coalition by definition. It's just a simple fact. Now, if you remember after we had our interim constitution and President Mandela formed a government of national unity, there he didn't have to, by virtue of the election result, he had to do that because it was in the interim constitution. Mm-hmm. So the ANC got 62% in the election of 1994, if I remember correctly. So they won a very clear overall majority. So in terms of the politics, he didn't need another party to help him get over 50%, but he was required to do that by the interim constitution. So that is what was set up. And that is clearly not a coalition. It's a government of national unity, because it's a coalition when parties need each other to get over 50%. Mm-hmm. So the important thing to know is that in any arrangement where no party gets above 50%, and they need to work with other parties in a formal agreement to get above 50%, that is a coalition, whatever else you want to call it. That is politics 101. We don't care what you call it. In the DA, we call it a hybrid model. Then other people call it the GNU. That's fine. We have no problem with calling it the government of national unity.
Okay. How did they explain it to you, though? Did they indicate why they want to call it this? You indicated in what you said last week at that foundation that he needed to convince other ANC members to buy into this idea. What did they say to you when they were saying, let's actually call it a GNU?
Well, the first point of departure is this. All parties, well, certainly our party, had difficulty in convincing our structures to go into what we've got now. You can't sit there and fight the ANC for 30 years and then think people are going to say, cool, let's go and govern with them. They are not going to say that. And if you've got internal democracy, as the DA has, you discuss it over a long period of time and you look at all the options. Now, there's only one good option for the DA, Clement, and that is if the DA wins over 50%. But I don't think any party is ever going to win over 50% nationally again. So if you don't win 50%, then you have to ask yourself, what is the second best, the third best, the fourth best? or what is the least bad option? And we had a long discussion repeatedly in the FedEx and in the Federal Council around this before we came to our decision on the hybrid model.
Okay. But if you leave the coalition, for instance, because part of your explanation is that if a party leaves, then that compromises on that coalition. But in this context, if you leave as the Democratic Alliance, the government of national unity will continue, no?
No, it won't. No, it won't.
So they have about 70% of the electorate. So if you leave as the DA, that leaves them with what?
Well, currently with the other parties, there are 9 parties. There are 9 other parties, I think, apart from the ANC in this coalition. If the DA left, the ANC would not be able to get over 50% with the other 8 parties.
The DA, okay, so the ANC wouldn't get the over 50% with some of the
ANC.
The 8 parties.
The ANC wouldn't get above 50% with the other 8 parties. That's what I meant to say. Thank you.
Okay, but what percentage then are you bringing, for instance? Because the ANC says we've got our 40%, and with our 40%, if you then bring in the IFP, you bring in the UDM, you bring in all the other parties that are part of this coalition, that moves them above that 50% mark that the ANC, you said the ANC wouldn't get. That's what the ANC believes.
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't.
Okay.
In the current configuration, they cannot get 50% without the DA in the current configuration. If they brought in MK or if they brought in the EFF, then they could. But in the current configuration, they can't.
Okay. Now, are you worried about the comments that you've made and the potential they have to create, I don't know, unnecessary stability within the GNU? I'm asking that because already Fikile Mbalula has come out to say your comments were an irritation that must be ignored. Nomvula Mokonyane just the other day, this past weekend, said the DA remains the ANC's guest in the GNU. That's how they're now characterizing even your involvement within this configuration. Do you worry that these public spats now are somehow going to complicate this arrangement?
It is really extraordinary to me that my simple technical analytical answer to a question at a seminar can cause waves in the GNU. It's the simple statement of the truth. South Africans are really not used to coalitions at national level. People do not understand how they work. In a country like Germany or in Denmark or in Sweden or in most other European countries in particular, not Britain, because Britain has a 2-party system primarily, although they have a third party there, and certainly not America. But in coalition systems, which are proportional representation systems, like South Africa has, people are very used to coalitions. And if anybody analyzes the facts of a coalition and discusses the politics 101 of coalitions, it should not cause a single ripple, let alone an outcry. But if I said the moon, it's full moon today, people would say to me, I'm supporting voodooism. They twist whatever I say. You know, the media has come to the conclusion that any conflict involving Zille is great for clicks. So I'm great clickbait for the media, but only when I'm fighting with someone. So when I'm not fighting with someone, as I mostly am not, they have to still turn it into a fight.
Oh, you haven't fought.
This was a purely analytical statement. Now, let me tell you what was wrong and what there should be an outcry about. And it's very telling that there is not an outcry about this. And I'll give you the reason why there isn't. There should be an outcry about the fact that Nomvula Mokonyane says the DA is a guest in the coalition. That is the heart of the problem. If there's any cause for friction, and currently there isn't friction in the coalition, but if there's any cause for friction, it is because some people in the ANC, I'm not saying all, think that we are there by grace and favor of the ANC. We are not. We have a third of that coalition or GNU, whatever you call it. The ANC has 2/3. And then we invited, or the ANC invited other small parties, and we protested at the time because the memorandum of intent or the statement of intent basically said that together and agree. But the biggest problem is that the ANC thinks that they are still wholly in control as if they won an election. They have not won an election. They lost an election. They need other parties to govern with them. We think it's a very good thing. But ANC must understand that we are there because 22% of voters voted for us, and not because they were so gracious and kind to invite us.
Okay, let's look at what's happened over the last 2 months, because this GNU is just less than 2 months old. The ANC president continues to reaffirm that this is the correct path for the party, for the country. As the DA, how do you assess even the performance of your ministers within the GNU so far and how they've been working with their counterparts? When I interviewed Siviwe Kwagube a month ago, she said, I'm here not as a DA minister, but I'm here as a South African minister. And there have been questions around whether or not they will fully submit themselves and be accountable to President Cyril Ramaphosa as someone who's leading in this administration. What's been your assessment as the DA so far?
Well, you see, there's another problem. Because it's not the ANC that gets to decide the priorities and the program of action. We decide on that together. And so far, that's been working very well. As I understand it, there was a policy letter which went very well. And the DA made a lot of inputs there, and the ANC made a lot of inputs there, and other parties made inputs there. That went well. We start with our manifesto as the DA, and we hold our ministers accountable to the DA's manifesto. However, we know that in coalitions, you have to compromise on some things, and it is a give and take. We have to compromise and give up some things that we don't want to give up. And the ANC and other parties have to compromise and give up things that they want that they can't have if they want to hold the coalition together. So that is the nature of a coalition. It is not that the biggest party says, this is our policy, and you are now going to implement our policy or we're going to kick you out. It doesn't work like that anywhere in the world. It works like this. We hold a policy, we set key policy priorities, but we do that together. And where there have to be compromises on all sides, we have to work them out together. And if a party thinks the compromise is going too far in violating their core principles, then they are always free to leave. But we have no intention of doing that. We are absolutely committed to the GNU. It's been going very well so far. And the DA in Parliament will hold our ministers to account, and we will hold the ANC ministers to account, and we will hold all other ministers to account, because that's the role of Parliament.
What's the status on the negotiations or discussions around the BELA bill? And is there even space for those discussions? Because the ANC, SATU and other stakeholders have been trying to get the president to sign that bill into law. I know you indicated to me when I had you on the show a month or so ago that the BELA bill is a non-negotiable for you as the Democratic Alliance. What do you expect Minister Siviwe Kwagube to do? Not so much because the bill is on the president's desk, so it depends on what he does now. But are those conversations open for the president to reconsider?
The important thing to remember, Clement, is that we also in the DA strongly adhere to the separation of the party and the state. So I can't speak for Siviwe Kwagube. Only she can, and her spokesperson can. So I can't say what Siviwe is going to do or Minister Kwagube is going to do. However, I know that the DA is very strong on the rights of governing bodies. We don't think it's a good idea to destroy the functioning schools. We think it's a much better idea to improve the non-functioning schools. And you may recall, you may not, that I came into politics in the first place on the basis of a school governing body's powers. I was the chair of a school governing body when my kids were in primary school in the 1990s. And back then, the government started messing around with the South African Schools Act. That was a very good act. It was the South African Schools Act, I think, of 1995 or 96. And they started messing around and violating their own law. And I put 80 schools together and we took them to court and we won. And then the ANC behaved just like the old National Party back in the day. And if they lost in court, they would just change the law. And then I went to Parliament. I was absolutely shocked by what I saw there. And I said, I've got to be in this arena. I must put my hat in the ring. And that's how I got into politics, defending the rights of school governing bodies in the law. And so we feel very strongly about this because we believe in decentralization of power. We believe that parents have the best interests of their children at heart. And we believe the real solution to South Africa's education crisis is not to level everybody down and not to make all schools equally bad in the state system, but in fact to make all schools equally good.
So what option is available to you then? So if the president signs this into law, as the DA, right, as a political party, as you say, you've got members of parliament who are supposed to hold the executive accountable. Is there a plan to then take it to court, to challenge this in court?
Well, we certainly won't sit quietly by and see the rights and powers of governing bodies eroded. That I can say for sure. And I can also say that we made this very, very clear to the ANC during the negotiations.
Okay. You made it clear, yes, during the negotiations, but clearly the ANC seems to be believing that this is the way to go in transforming the basic education sector. So you're saying that you're not going to take it lightly. Would you consider court action?
Clement? Let's have a clear definition of transforming the basic education system. There's only one thing you have to do to improve, to transform, and that is to improve the quality. Transformation has nothing to do with race and everything to do with improving the quality of public schools. There are very few public schools of a high standard. We want to keep those of a high standard. What we need to do is make every other school of an equally high standard. And it's got nothing to do with resources. There's been a massive redistribution of resources to the poorest schools, but it has not been accompanied by improvements in quality. So the government needs to focus all its attention, not on punishing and destroying the good schools, but on supporting and improving the bad schools. And that should be the focus.
How do you think signing the BELA bill into law going to destroy those good schools? Because the ANC, I'm asking that because the ANC says, and I hear you what you say about the need to improve the quality, but the ANC says, well, what this bill does is remove a loophole that allows SGBs, for instance, to exclude learners from admission based on race. So they believe the bill will ensure the accommodation even of South Africa's official languages and address the historical injustices of forcing learners whose mother tongue is neither Afrikaans nor English to study in these specific languages. And this is not only, of course, related to Afrikaans and English. It could be in, let's say, Xhosa in the Northern Cape, where not in the Northern Cape, in the Northwest, where, and this is an explanation that was given to me by the Education Department when we discussed this bill last week. They said, you look at the Northwest, for instance, a lot of people there speak Setswana, but a lot of people who are in schools as well are speaking Xhosa because most of their parents who work within the Platinum Belt in that province are coming from the Eastern Cape. You need an SGB that is more flexible and takes all of these things into consideration.
There is a constitutional right for people to have education in their mother tongue. That is a constitutional right. And A right is something that you cannot force people to take up. A right is something that you cannot take away from people. And there's another truth about language. Only the speakers of that language can take the steps that are necessary to protect that language. So if Zulu-speaking South Africans, if Xhosa-speaking South Africans, if Setswana-speaking South Africans, or any other group want to advance their language into a language of education from pre-primary to the highest level, the speakers of that language have to take that initiative in specific ways, just like the Afrikaners did. And they have an institution that is supposed to help them called PANSAL, the Pan-South African Language Board. And they are there with a very big budget to help people do precisely that. Now, the deaf community has been very good in taking up that offer because they have developed sign language into a matric subject, South African Sign Language very specifically, and they've done an enormous amount to develop that language into the next official language for South Africa. So they've used that opportunity. Now, let me just do some very simple maths while I'm talking about language, and it is this. You've got very few good schools compared to the demand. Every child in South Africa and every parent in South Africa will want their children to go to the handful of good schools that there are, but they can't because there is just simply a capacity problem. Now, you cannot take away people's right to mother tongue education, and that is why school governing bodies have the right to determine the language policy of a school.
Okay.
There are many English-speaking schools in the area, but people whose children don't speak a word of Afrikaans want to send their children to an Afrikaans school for the simple reason that it's better quality. So obviously, the solution is to fix the quality of the bad English-speaking schools.
Okay.
Because you cannot overload a school and erode the rights of parents. You cannot do that.
All right, Helen, let me take the latest in Eyewitness News headlines. We're going to continue this conversation afterwards. It's 10:33.
7:02.
The Clement Manyathela Show.
Let's walk the talk.
It's 23 minutes now before 11 o'clock. We're in conversation with Helen Zille, the DA Federal Executive Chair. I've got your inputs on the WhatsApp line, also your calls on 011-883-0702, and we'll get into those in a moment. Helen, I just want to confirm here, you indicated you won't sit quietly if this BELA bill is signed into law by the president. Am I correct to say that you are not ruling out any court action in challenging it, should it be signed into law as the DA?
Of course I'm not ruling that out. I'm not ruling that out at all.
All right.
I mean, we take court actions all the time in defense of the Constitution. And just because we're in a government of national unity does not mean that the DA is going to stop defending the Constitution. We are going to continue defending the Constitution.
Okay. Let's talk about the realignment of politics in
Can I just say something? Because I've been, as they say, triggered by the 702 advertisement for Women's Month.
Go ahead.
It's all very good to salute the past, and I'm all in favor of that. But what about speaking a little bit about the present, of the rate of teenage pregnancies, which is skyrocketing, of the men who have intergenerational sex with young girls, leave them with babies and walk away from them. That is the kind of thing that destroys women's future. And that is, frankly, what 702 should be talking about in Women's Month. Just saying.
Okay, you've triggered me as well. So I'll also just say that 702 has actually been having those conversations. I can send you podcasts. I know Bongani Bingwa, for instance, focused the big interview, which is after 7 o'clock. That's the time where they put the big interviews and conversations. Bongani Bingwa focused on this conversation that you're saying 702 should have this Women's Month. I can tell you about other hosts on this platform who have had that conversation. So when we talk about Women's Month and celebrating women, doesn't mean that's all we do on 702. You can walk and chew at the same time. I always tell the listeners. So the fact that you hear an ad like that doesn't mean we're abandoning other conversations. In fact, the very same conversation you're raising now has been had multiple times here on 702, and we won't stop. We'll continue having them. I want us to talk about...
Let me make a suggestion.
Yeah.
I believe your main ad should be an admonition to men who have babies and walk away from them, and then you can have a conversation now and again about the history of Women's Day.
No, Helen, you and I are not experts in ads and advertising. Yeah, no. Let's let the sales team do what they have to do. Let's do what you and I are good at, right? I'm a broadcaster, you're a politician. Let's talk about the realignment of politics. You've indicated that over the next 10 to 15 years, the ANC was likely to disintegrate because it's going to be grappling with the loss of complete state power, and that you think your real competitor in politics is the EFF because the EFF sort of knows what it stands for. Is that what you see even when we look towards the 2026 or 2029 elections, that ultimately as the DA, your real competitor is going to be the EFF?
This is very, very old news, because if you go back, I said this in 2014, that is 10 years ago, Clement. When the EFF first came onto the scene and got 6% in that election, I spoke to our federal council. I drew them a triangle on the board, which I'll one day draw for you, and I explained to them how politics would realign. I've been talking about the realignment of politics since 2007, when I became the leader of the DA. And I've been focusing very much on that because it's crucially important. Now, there are three things you need to be a viable political party. The only party that has all three is the DA in the whole of South Africa. We're the only party who has all three. Firstly, we're the only genuinely non-racial party that's voters is divided between 1/3 black, 1/3 colored, 1/3 white. So we're the only genuinely non-racial and inclusive party. The ANC isn't at all, and nor are most of the other parties. But that's not the critical variable that I'm talking about now. That's just by the way. For any party anywhere in the world to succeed over the long term, you need three things. Number one, you need a very clear political philosophy. The DA has one. We believe in constitutionalism, the rule of law, non-racialism. We believe in a market-based economy with safety nets for the poor. Those are all the things that we passionately believe in. Then the EFF also knows exactly what it believes in, but I won't go into that now. The second thing that a party needs to survive is strong internal institutions. And the DA is, again, the only party in South Africa that has that. We're a machine. And there are many, many moving parts to a functional political party. And we call it the blue machine. And it really has a huge number of parts that are working well, that are integrated with each other, that are well-oiled, and that function optimally, especially when we're running into elections. I think very few other parties have that. The ANC has structures and systems, but I don't know how well they work. They seem a bit chaotic to me. The EFF doesn't, because the leader decides everything. And I think the same is true for MK, where it's a party built around the personality of Jacob Zuma. So they don't have any internal institutions, which is why Jacob Zuma can hire and fire in that way, which a party that has due process and the rule of internal law and constitutions doesn't do that. They go through proper processes. So that's the second thing a party needs to survive. And the DA is the only party that's got that. And then the third thing a party needs is that they have to crowd in talent. They have to get really the best people available on board. And that is why when we are choosing candidates for election or choosing people to work in our organization, we really drive meritocracy very seriously. And we have complete non-racialism in that meritocracy. So the best candidates from across the board come forward, and those exceptional candidates create a virtuous cycle where things get better and better and work better and better all the time. So that is what you need as a political party to work. And that is what the DA has, and we're the only party that has it.
So you think ultimately this is the competition with the economic freedom fighters, and what do you think as the DA?
But you see, the reason that I say that is because I don't know what the ANC stands for. You see, the EFF knows what they stand for. They stand for the leader controlling the party controlling the state controlling society. That's your classic totalitarian system. It's the dead opposite from what the DA stands for. We all know from history where a totalitarian system leads. It leads to misery, to poverty, to dictatorship, and everything else. But at least the EFF knows what they stand for. The DA knows exactly what it stands for, and that's the first thing that a party needs, is to know what they stand for. What does the ANC stand for? I can't answer that question for them. I only know their mantra: non-racial, non-sexist, democratic, and there's one other word. I think it's inclusive or something like that. South Africa, that's what they stand for. But if you look at them, they are none of the above. None of the above. So I don't know what their political philosophy is. There are some that tend more to the totalitarian end of the spectrum, and there are many of them that tend more to the constitutional and democratic side of the spectrum.
All right. I want to bring in the listeners
and
now.
Then, sure.
Yeah, Helen, let me just play some WhatsApp voice notes and take some calls from some of our listeners as we continue this conversation. Let's start here.
Hi, good morning, Clemmy. In Mazilla there, Flores here from the Western Cape. First of all, I would just like to clarify, I'm not a DA voter, ANC, EFF, or for that matter. However, I've always liked your style, the way you portraying yourself, not backing down for anything. But I was just laughing when Makonyane said that you are a guest in the GNU. It was such a laughing matter because the ANC did not win an outright majority to rule on its own. Yet, she want to tell you that you are a guest and you cannot just come and do as you please. Yeah, it was just quite strange for me how this lady who has a dark cloud over her head tries to be an iron woman in the ANC, NEC, and yet she tries and have a slap at you. Yeah, what's your response on that? Have a great show. Bye-bye.
Good day, Clement. Good morning, Clement. Clement, for me, Fikile Mbalula or ANC seems like they don't accept that they don't have outright majority. So it seems like they still want to rule, even though they did not win. And I don't think it's going to happen. Now they must accept that this is a coalition, and then everyone have to say something. Not always, we listen to them for the past 8 years. I think now is the time for them to listen each other. Thank you.
Thank you. Lumka, Musa, Buhle, Benny, I see your calls. We'll start with them after the break. It's 12 minutes before 11.
702.
The Clement Manyathela Show.
Let's walk the talk.
All right, it's 9 minutes before 11 o'clock. Let's take some of your calls on 011-883-0702. Lumka, you're calling us from Boksburg. Quickly, good morning.
Thank you, Clement. Good morning. I just want to say that we cannot allow, we won't sit quietly. As much as Helen is not going to sit quietly if this bill has been signed by the president, we are not going to sit quietly until this BELA bill is signed by the president. Because we cannot watch and fold our arms watching Helen wanting to put forward a white supremacy narrative. Clement, we've moved into the suburbs in numbers. Be it 50% English speaking, 50% Africans. It cannot be that in South Africa we have to explain to our kids why schools are left lily white in the new democracy in South Africa. Oh, Helen is nothing but, she doesn't love this country. All that she's about is about her to push a white supremacy narrative, which is not going to be tolerated. We're going to take her head on in courts. We're going to be there as defendants. We formulated the MPOs exclusively to deal with it.
All right. Lumka, are you with SADU? If you don't mind answering that.
Sorry?
When you say we, are you a member of SADU?
I'm talking as black people who cannot take the nonsense
from the community.
From
all right.
People like Helen.
Got it. Lumka in Boksburg, thanks for your call. Benny in Pretoria, go ahead. Hi. Benny in Pretoria.
Yes, I just want to applaud Helen Zille as very astute and firm in her endeavor, actually. And I want to number the ANC. You know, he thinks all the parties have come to with default, and the DA came with members and percentage that it is, and this narrative that the ANC must bully even the presenters that they are speaking the language of the ANC. I'm firm with Helen Zille. South Africa must be democratic and open to all people.
All right, Benny, thank you for your call in Pretoria. Bushe, you are in Pretoria. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Clement, and good morning. I just want to hear from Ms. Zille, who's been very critical about other political parties. If she's able to be critical with the DA, you can't sit there and tell us that the EFF is this, the ANC is that, they don't know what it is that they stand for, and so on and so forth. What is it about the DA that is so right that it's not growing, if they're so perfect? Can Helen Zille please just tell us what is not right about the DA? What is it that is not right about the DA? Can she give us a balanced view and stop telling us about all these wonderful things because she's saying that they're wonderful? If you're so wonderful, why are you not growing as a party? Why are you not growing as a party?
So
and to sit there and be critical of other parties saying that they don't know what they stand for and the DA knows what it stands for, that's very arrogant.
All right, Bushe in Pretoria, thank you so much for your call. Helen?
Good. Thank you very much indeed, Clement. In the middle there were a whole lot of people speaking, and I didn't know whether they were advertisements for another show or whether they were on your show. But let me start. Was it Flores who asked? Yes, absolutely. He made a very good point about being a guest in the GNU. In 1995-96, when we were in the first GNU, that was on the basis of the Constitution. The ANC had got 62% in the election in 1994. And then every party was a guest in the GNU because the ANC had an overall majority without any other party. So then they were a guest in the GNU. And that's why the DP turned it down. Because if you're merely there as a guest, then you have to toe the line and you can't stand up for your voters. You have to listen to the majority party. And it was for that reason that Tony Leon, who was our leader then, said, no, thank you, when he was invited, and he preferred to build us in opposition, which was a good strategy because it worked very well.
All right.
And in this point, I can just answer the question of, was it Bushle?
Yeah, what's wrong with the DA?
Yeah, what's wrong with the DA? Well, let me tell you, Bushle, that in 1994, the DA got 1.7% of the vote in its predecessor party, the DP. Now we are on 22% of the vote. And in fact, we were the only party represented in Parliament that grew in the last election. The only one. Every other party represented in Parliament went backwards. So the DA has grown from 1.4% to 22%. We know exactly what we stand for. And the people who vote for us are voting for a set of principles and values. And more people, as we see from the election results, support our principles and values of non-racialism, of constitutionalism, of the rule of law. And that is why we will keep on growing. It doesn't happen rapidly in a complex plural society, but in a system where you have coalitions, you don't need to get over 50%. And that's a very important point. We're not aiming for over 50% because no party is likely to get over 50% again. You just have to be in a strong position in the 20s, and you can be the biggest party in a coalition. And our aim is to be the biggest party in a coalition, and that's very important for people to understand.
So, just two last questions, Helen. Hopefully,
I'm answering the question about Fikile.
Which question?
There was a question about Fikile doesn't accept that they don't have an outright majority.
Yeah,
that was a question. Well, absolutely. They want to govern as if they have got a majority, which is not the case. On the BELA bill with Lumka, yes, I'm sure in Boksburg there are many schools, and I know that there are many English-speaking schools and many Afrikaans-speaking schools, and you can choose to send your child to the school with the language that it has, that you choose. It is for the school governing body to determine language policy, and it's not true that that makes a school lily-white. In the Western Cape, we have many, many schools that teach in Afrikaans and that have black, coloured and white children. They have children from all races, and those children speak Afrikaans at school and are taught in Afrikaans at school because it is a right in the Constitution. So it's very important to understand that and to defend that right. Okay. Because if you defend other people's rights, they will defend your rights.
Yeah, Helen.
Because in a constitutional democracy, we defend everybody's rights.
Yeah, just hold it there, Helen. By the way, if you missed the debate we had on the BELA bill, we had all the government, the Department of Education, we had SATU, we had the organization that represents the school governing bodies. We even had the DA. Just go check out that podcast because it really gives you a sense of what the different parties are arguing about, what is right and what is not right about this particular bill. I've got just three more questions that I want to ask Helen, coming also from the listener. So, Helen, if you don't mind, I can just ask you those after the news at 11 o'clock before we continue with the rest of the show. It's a minute now before 11. Hello, Dumelang, welcome to the third and final hour of the Clement Manyathela show. Before we get into our World of Work feature, I want us to just finish off the conversation we started with Helen Zille. There were two more questions that came from some of you, so I wanted to give her an opportunity to respond to that. So, Helen, if you can, the first question is on the national dialogue that President Cyril Ramaphosa has been talking about. Are you involved as the DA in constituting that national dialogue that the President has been speaking about? What role do you think you can play? And then here are two other WhatsApp voice notes that came through during our conversation.
Good morning, Clem, and to Ms. Zille there. Just a quick question to your guest. Just before I think the government of national unity was the agreement was concluded. She was quoted as saying she will appeal to the ministers who will serve in the cabinet from the DA side, that is to lead by example and not have houses in Cape Town and Pretoria. And secondly, she will, or they will appeal as a party to them to cut on the bloated entourage of too many VIP vehicles and bodyguards. Has that request been done to those ministers, and what is the outcome thereof? Or does just all talk when they're outside? Now that they're in, they also going along with the gravy train as it were? It'll be interesting to hear what has happened 2 months down the line. Kiki.
All right, Kiki, I'll get her to respond to that. Let's play just the last question that also came through.
Non-racial.
Hi, Clement. Please ask Helen the best people. So is Ronaldo host the best person that they could choose? And she talks about non-racialism. We've seen the DA. It's not really diverse.
All right, Helen, there's a question about Ronaldo House and a question about the DA, the ministers from the DA in cabinet having homes in Joburg and Pretoria. You've indicated as the DA, you've always wanted to live by example. We've seen what you have done, even when you were mayor in the Western Cape. What's the status on that front? And that question around the national dialogue, please.
Okay, let me start with the first one, which was the national dialogue. No, we have not yet been involved, but I'm going to be meeting the Secretary General of the ANC on Thursday to discuss this, because we need to be involved, and we will be involved. Then number two, Yes, I understand none of the DA ministers use blue lights and all of that sort of thing. And my understanding is that we have stuck by that commitment not to have 2 ministerial homes, one in Tshwane and one in Cape Town. And there was even discussion, I don't know how far it's got, that when they get to Tshwane, the DA ministers who are based in Cape Town will share a house in Tshwane so that we don't use too many state resources. Then on Ronaldo Gous, he has been suspended from the DA and he's facing disciplinary action. And the DA is the only diverse party in South Africa that's truly diverse. We have 452 black public representatives. We have provincial leaders who are black. We have people on the federal executive who are black. We have ministers who are black. But they would take exception to me defining them as their identity as being black, because their color does not define who they are. And the critical thing about the DA is we don't allow your color to define who you are. We allow the type of person you are to define who you are. The DA got more black votes than Rise Mzansi, the IFP in Gauteng, BOSA, and all of those small parties put together, including the PAC and the ZOPO and yada, yada, yada. We got more black people voting for us than all of those parties put together. So I would very much like to say to you that the DA is the only non-racial party. A lot of our public representatives are black, a lot, and they're doing extremely well. The problem, Clement, is that the media only takes notice of a black person in the DA when they leave the DA. They ignore those leaders and those public representatives while they're inside the DA, so that people can, like the person who's just said, we don't have black public representatives. It's because the media couldn't care about people, black people, when they're getting on with their work and doing brilliantly inside the DA. They only take notice of them when they leave the DA. And that is very unfortunate, but we know what it is. We know where most of the journalists come from. They come from all these critical race theory journalism schools, so we understand exactly what we're up against. But we are the one party in South Africa. Your race tells me nothing about you. Your integrity, your honorable honesty, your character, your sense of responsibility, your commitment to other people, that tells me who you are. Your color doesn't.
All right, yeah. Helen, thank you so much for making time for us. I think next time we'll bring you back to come and discuss the issue of race. I remember Mmusi Maimane, when he was actually elected leader of the DA, he said, if you don't see that I'm black, then you don't see me. So, which I actually agree with. It doesn't mean race particularly defines who you truly are in all your essence. But in our context in this country, it's important that you actually see that I'm black. It doesn't speak to whether I'm more resourceful, I'm more intelligent or less. But given the context, I actually want you to see that I'm black. If you don't see that, then you don't see me at all. Thank you for responding to some of these questions that have come from our listeners. It's 14 minutes now after 11 o'clock. Helen, are you saying something there?
Yes, I'm responding.
Yeah.
Those of us who are blessed with a gift of sight can obviously see what color a person is, but we don't make judgments about people on the basis of what color they are.
Well,
and that is the problem with this mad wokeness. It says we see that you're black, therefore we put you in a box of being black, therefore we think you've got the same opinion as every other black person. That puts you in a stereotypical mold. That is racism, and we reject it.
And that's not what we're talking about here. Yes, the apartheid system actually made a judgment on people based on their skin color. That's not what's happening in this
and we want to
democratic
get rid
country.
of that. We don't want to reinforce it.
Yes, that's not what's happening here. But I'm just saying to you that as a black person, actually, I want you to take my blackness into context, because that comes with history. That comes with context. If you think you don't want to do that, or as the DA, that's not what you believe in, that's also fine. But understand that there are some black people who will say, you noticing and taking my black context into consideration doesn't mean you're giving me more props, or doesn't mean you think I'm less of. It means you are wholesome in your consideration of me as a person, given where we come from in this country.
Okay, Clement, I'd like to make one more point and then I'm going. There is no way that you can look at all assume that they have the same context. That is the risk of looking people on the basis of their race. A poor person born in a shack to a single mother who potentially, let's say, has AIDS is in a very different context from the child of a top politician or top businessman who also happens to be black, who goes to the best schools, etc., etc. You can tell nothing about people in the modern South Africa by just looking at their color. You have to take their context into account. What do you know about my context and my history and what happened to my parents and grandparents by looking at the fact that I'm white? What do you know about my upbringing and my value as a person just by looking at the fact that I'm white? You cannot generalize about people on the basis of their race. You have to see them as individuals, in terms of which their color happens to be one, but in my view, an unimportant attribute.
All right.
I look more at their context, reality of their lives, and the quality of their character.
All right, Helen. Yeah, we look at it differently. Maybe we should have you back so we can have a conversation broadly about that. Thank you so much for making time for us.